Hi bank, I just paid off my credit card, but my credit score dropped? Why? Well, that's because you paid me on the due date. Exactly, as I should. Well, doesn't everyone know that the worst day to pay your credit card bill is on the due date? Hey folks, and welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new, hi, my name is John of John's Finance Tips. And this is a channel we dedicate to talking all things money. Today's money topic is how to avoid the worst day to pay your credit card bill where you can actually accidentally crash your credit score. I know it sounds crazy, but stick with me. And in this video, I'm also gonna show you the best day that you can pay your credit card bill so you can actually boost your credit score. If that sounds like a plan, then all I ask is for you to get comfortable and we're going to go into today's video. We're gonna have two parts. In part one, I'm gonna go over the 5 key factors that can hurt your credit score. In the second part, I'm gonna talk about why you need to avoid the due date when it comes to paying your credit card bill and why there's a much better date that you can actually pay your bill and boost your score. And I do wanna say, when it comes to building a good credit score, the easiest way, in my opinion, is just getting a credit card. Getting a beginner credit card with no annual fee, getting a secured credit card that you might have to put a little money behind, but whatever it is, start with a good beginner credit card and then you scale up. And if you would like to see a list of some of my favorite credit cards currently with some of the best offers, my affiliate links are in the description box down below. Check them out. Let me know if you have any questions. And by the way, if you can't find any links, send me an email. I'll go ahead and find it for you. But regardless, if you'd like to support my channel, I've got some great links for cards down there as well. All right, let's get back to the video. Part one, and it just so happens that these 5 factors make up your credit score. And so the 5 factors are: 1, on-time payments; 2, your credit utilization; 3, your length of credit history; 4 is gonna be your credit mix; and 5 is gonna be your hard inquiries. I'll go over each individual one, but also we need to note that they're not all weighted the same. So let's go over the ones that are the most important. The first one, and this one accounts for 35% of your credit score, that's going to be on-time payments. And this one is very simple. Are you making your credit card bill payments on time? If you are, great. If you're not, your credit score is gonna get crushed. And keep in mind, it's not just missing it by a day or two, because we've all kind of had our misses. It's by missing it 30, 60, or 90 days or more. That is when you're going to hurt yourself. So be sure that you're making your payments on time. I recommend setting up automatic payments. The second most important factor is credit utilization, and that accounts for 30% of your credit score. Credit utilization is very, very simple. Basically, you're looking at how much of the available credit extended to you are you using? So let's say a credit card issuer gives you a $10,000 credit limit, and you go ahead and use $5,000 of it. Well, $5,000 over $10,000, that's a 50% utilization. Not good. Anything over 30% is when you actually are gonna get a ding on your credit score. The reason being, and I personally think it's kind of dumb, but this is the way it works in the real world, a bank sees someone who is borrowing more money as more risky, and therefore they don't want to incentivize that behavior, and so that's gonna ding your credit score. However, if you keep your utilization under 30%, then you're good to go. And this is actually where the magic happens, where you can actually have control of whether your credit score goes up or down simply by when you pay, and that's what we're going to touch on in the second section. So stick around for that. Third component that accounts for 15% of your credit score is gonna be your length of credit history, or in other words, the average age of your credit profiles. And this is one that people kind of get caught up on, and there's a lot of confusion. This simply means how old is your oldest account, and then also you average out all the available accounts that you have in front of you. And you'll often hear people say, oh, don't cancel credit cards that you opened a long time ago. Well, in actuality, you should really just never cancel your very first card if you can help it, but all the subsequent ones you get along the way, it's not a big deal as long as you have a lot of available credit to you. For example, I at this point have probably opened well over 65 or 70 credit cards. I currently only have 8 or 9 open, so that would mean I've probably closed 50 plus credit cards. My credit score typically hovers now between 800 and 820. So hopefully that puts you at ease so that you can feel comfortable when you go and close old credit cards that it's not going to hurt your credit score. And I'll explain in the second section of how it can impact a different key factor, aka the credit utilization. The fourth component of a credit score is your credit mix, and this accounts for 10% of your overall score. So this is typically taking a look at whether or not you have different types of accounts. Credit cards are revolving credit, whereas something like a student loan is a fixed line of credit, where the amount of money you owe isn't gonna change month over month. So as long as you have a good mix, you're good to go. And the fifth key factor you wanna keep in mind are hard inquiries, or what are also called hard pulls. So this is what happens when you go and apply for a credit card or you get an auto loan, and they go ahead and pull your credit report to take a look at whether or not you would qualify for the loan. Well, if you have too many of those, lenders are gonna be like, hey, it looks like you're going around asking for a bunch of credit. We think that's risky, and therefore we're going to ding your credit score. And because this only accounts for 10% of your score though, I'm not too worried, and hard inquiries fall off after 2 years. So this is not something I'm too worried about. It really is the first two. But more specific in today's video, we're actually gonna focus on the credit utilization factor, because within that, there's a key date, which is that due date, that if you pay on the wrong date, you can actually tank your credit score. Why the due date is the worst possible day to pay your credit card bill. Here's the thing, you and I and everyone else rightly assumes that a due date is the day that you should pay a credit card bill. I mean, after all, it's due that day. Yet, why is it that sometimes you pay it on the due date, but your credit score still goes that way? Well, it all has to do with credit utilization. Remember earlier we said credit utilization accounts for 30% of your overall credit score? And remember, the more credit that you use, the more likely it could be that it hurts your credit score. Specifically, with a utilization percentage of over 20 or 30% is when we get into a territory of like, ooh, that might not be so good for us. But then if you're paying your credit card bill in full every single month, how could credit utilization hurt you? Shouldn't your utilization be 0%? So let me go ahead and explain to you exactly how the due date actually works and how it's actually possibly hurting your credit score. Let's do a hypothetical. Let's say your credit card statement starts on January 1st and it closes on January 31st. So therefore, everything that you spend in that month, you're gonna have to pay on the due date. And your due date typically isn't another 24 or 25 days later. So January 1 to January 31, you spend. And let's say you spent $5,000 of a $10,000 credit limit. Cool. And then January 31st comes, and that is what's called your closing date, all right? Keep that in mind, that's gonna be very important. And then you have $5,000 in your checking account. You are ready to pay that sucker off on the due date. And so when February 24th comes around, and that's gonna be the due date for the amount of money that you spent in January, you pay the entire thing off. You think, here we go, I paid it all off, I'm good to go. But yet, your credit score's already taken a hit. What happened there? Well, let's rewind back to January 31st, because that date is called the closing date. You see, there's a bit of a quirk here, because on the closing date, January 31st, that is actually when the banks tell all of the credit bureaus how much of your credit that you used. And so on January 31st, you have used $5,000 of a $10,000 credit limit, even though you don't owe the bank a penny until the due date, which is 20 plus days later. But the credit bureaus have no idea, and so they go, oh wow, look, on January 31st, John is using 50% of his credit? Yeah, let's go ahead and ding him right away, because that is bad. Even though I have, or you have, $5,000 ready to pay that bill off, except you're just gonna wait until the due date. Yikes. So instead of focusing around the due date, what we should actually be focusing on is what is our credit utilization around the statement close date? Because by having a really high utilization, even though you're gonna pay the entire thing off, for a short term, your credit score could tank until you get the utilization down. But every single month, let's say you just hypothetically have a utilization of 30, 40, 50%, your credit score is continually going to be suppressed even though you're paying off the entire thing. And so my number one recommendation, avoid paying everything off on the due date. Instead, you should pay 90 to 95% of your entire bill before the closing date. So from January 1 to January 31st, I would actually go ahead and make a payment on January 27th or January 28th so that my utilization is now gonna be maybe 5% or 10%, which is then going to be able to boost my credit score, and then on the due date, I pay the rest off. There is no penalty whatsoever for early payment. You can only help yourself. What you do right now is go get your credit card statement, whether online or the physical paper, and look for something that says closing date, statement close date. That is the magical date where you want to pay off the majority of your credit card balance. You want to leave a little bit on, like 1%, 2%, 3%, just to show that, hey, I'm still using my credit, but you do not want that sucker to be 50%, 80%, 90% on that date, all right? And typically, your closing date is gonna be at least 2 to 3 weeks before your actual due date. And here's where it can get confusing, all right? So let's go ahead and continue with this example. Now let's say the next statement cycle for this person starts on February 1st and goes until February 28th. However, they have a due date of February 24th. What does that mean? Well, that means that's actually the due date for the previous month, okay? So the due date for February is probably gonna be sometime in March. So people often get confused, like, wait, how is my due date before my closing date? It's because it's the due date for the previous month. And so as long as you're making your payments before the closing date of the current month, you're good to go, and then you make a small payment on the due date. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, comments, questions, drop it down there as well. But I'm not done. I also want to talk about earlier where we talk about average length of credit history. And so people get scared of closing credit cards because they think it's going to hurt their credit score. Because remember, the third key contributing factor of your credit score is your average length of credit history, which contributes 15% to your credit score. But it actually isn't the act of closing a card and then having a decreased length of credit history. It actually has to do with your credit utilization. So let's say, for instance, you had 2 credit cards. They each have a $5,000 credit limit. So your total available credit is $10,000, okay? And let's say you purchase this camera lens, all right? You purchase this camera lens for $2,000. A $2,000 camera lens with $10,000 of available credit across all of your credit cards. Well, your total credit utilization for your entire credit profile is 20%. You're good. You're under that 30%. You're well on the right track. But let's say you actually closed one of those credit cards. Suddenly, you are spending $2,000 out of a $5,000 total available credit. Well, your utilization just went up to 40%. And that is what's gonna immediately hurt you, okay? So it's not just the act of closing the card, it's the act of your credit utilization going higher. But if you had 4 credit cards and each had a $5,000 credit limit, well, it doesn't really matter then if you just closed one, because your utilization is still gonna be well below that 25 to 30% threshold where it's going to hurt you. Hopefully that made sense. And so that's the video, folks. Remember, your due date for most people is the worst day to pay your credit card bill because you're accidentally forgetting that your credit utilization is reported weeks in advance. Instead, what you should do is pay the majority of your credit card bill off before that statement close date or closing date or statement date. There's a lot of words for it. And then you can make sure that your utilization is low, pay the rest off on your due date, and you're good to go. That's it. Cool. Comments, questions down below, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.